Hey. Alright, I'm recording commentary over a Pendulum FTK, mostly for Jay, who said he did not understand what was happening. Now, Jay doesn't really play Yu-Gi-Oh!, so I'm going to be going over this as, maybe overly detailed. And I'm also going to point out some times where I potentially misplayed. An important thing to note is that the replays do not capture your opponent's, thinking. When your opponent has interaction in this game, their field will light up in a certain way, so you know that they have the interaction, whether or not they use it. This gives you, some amount of information, so sometimes I will go for plays that could potentially have been risky, but I knew at the time that they didn't have interaction. Also, within this combo, a lot of the interaction doesn't necessarily matter. But I'll be pointing these out as they come up. Something to note about this hand is that I do not have any Pendulum Magicians. I will need Pendulum Magicians in order to, get off most of my effects, and I do not have a way immediately in this hand in order to actually get out the needed materials for the FTK. So I'm going to have to search through my deck a whole bunch to get there. Now, the first thing I do is scale Abyss Actor Curtain Raiser. Abyss Actor Curtain Raiser... Well, okay, pendulums in general, you scale them by putting them in the far spell zones. Once they're scaled, your opponent can respond. I saw that my opponent had potential response, and I know from, general card pool, what people run, that this is almost definitely Maxi. And I really want to bait out the Maxi, because it'll be really funny in a replay, that I can then post on Twitter and get likes and retweets and feel good about myself. So... what I do here is scale the Curtain Raiser, and then I'm going to summon him immediately. This is a slight misplay. I believe probably what was better was to do Duelist Alliance first. Duelist Alliance would have baited out a potential Ash, and the searches that I'm going to get are going to be really important. I don't want my Pendulum Call to be ashed, and I would prefer my Skullcrobat to not be ashed. So... doing the Duelist Alliance here, it's probably the least essential, and it would at least let me know whether or not they have the Ash in hand. Also, doing it earlier would be better because they're going to get to draw a card off of this Maxi, and they could potentially draw into the Ash. So, I don't know, whatever. In any case, I just kind of winged it. I had faith that they weren't going to get the Ash. And if they don't get the Ash early, all my searches happen early. So here we go, we have the Skullcrobat Joker. Also, you saw there, my opponent drew a card. They drew a card because they played this card called Ash Sea, which is bullshit. During either player's turn, you send it to the graveyard, then every time your opponent special summons, you can immediately draw one card. It's really good because you play it, and then your opponent either has to end their turn, or do something really conservative, so that you don't draw too much. Or, they continue with their combo, summon a bunch of assholes, you draw a bunch of cards. Then you can kill them on your turn. So it's very fucked up. In this case, I'm going to FTK them, so I don't really care if they draw cards, but drawing cards could potentially draw them into interruption. I'll talk about ways in which you can play around the interruption a little bit. It's not going to come up. And I'm at this point pretty confident that it's not going to come up because the interactions that would be really relevant are just not commonly run on ladder. So I just kind of assumed they didn't have them. But I will mention them when they're relevant. So I got the search from Skullcrobat, and I got Oath Dragon, and I scale Oath Dragon here. Oath Dragon has a good effect that I'll use later in the combo, but for now, he's just a low scale. You need to have a low scale and a high scale in order to effectively Pendulum Summon. In order to Pendulum Summon at all. Oath Dragon's the scale 2. Most of my monsters are level 4. I also have some I have a level 7. And I guess I have level 6s. But the relevant ones are 4, so I'm going to need to get another scale that is at least 5 and preferably 8 before I can actually Pendulum Summon. Additionally, Oath Dragon has an effect that requires me to have a Magician in my other zone. Also, Tuning Magician has an effect that cares about having 2 Magicians in my Pendulum zones, which will let me summon her for free. I'll end up doing that eventually. So the point is I really want 2 Magicians. That's part of the reason why I didn't scale Skullcrobat in order to get the Duelist Alliance search, which, I mean, I guess it's slightly safer because I could Duelist Alliance if that got ashed Pendulum Call. Ash being a hand trap that stops searches. But like I said, I didn't care. Anywho, I'm going to Duelist Alliance now and search out Star Pendulum Graph. So Star Pendulum Graph, what this does is that if a Magician Pendulum card leaves the field, I'll get a search. This happens, and I get Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. My opponent draws a card. What Heavy Metal Foes Electromite does is on summon, I get to take a card from my deck and put it in my face-up extra. You'll also notice that the materials I used to summon Heavy Metal Foes Electromite have gone into my face-up extra. And the way that I summon him is a Link Summon. If you don't know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh!, Link Summon is a special summon from your extra deck, which is this 15-card deck of stuff that you have access to all the time. And when you Link Summon, you take monsters, you tribute them. I think it's tribute, whatever the verb is. And then you pull the link from your extra, and you special summon it. Counts as a special summon, so the maxi goes off. Electromite, when you summon him, you take a card from your deck, you put it in your face-up extra. I added Astrograph Sorcerer. What Astrograph Sorcerer does is that if he's in my hand and a card is destroyed, I can immediately special him. That's going to be relevant. Nah, I don't think that was a misplay at all. I don't know. Oh, I see. Right. Okay, I remember this now. So then I activate Pendulum Call. So the problem that I have right now is that I just have very little in my hand. I have very little on field, and I need to be able to get a bunch of monsters out so that I can FTK. With Pendulum Call, I discard a card and I get to search for 2 magicians. There are 2 Pendulum Magicians. So I'm going to get rid of the Tuning Magician, who has a graveyard effect that will let me special summon her. And then I'm going to add Celestial Magician and Black Fang Magician. This is just straight up wrong. I goofed and I thought that I was adding off of the Star Pendulum Graph for whatever reason, because I thought that Star Pendulum Graph was going to trigger since I had just left. I had some pendulums leave the field. I just didn't think about it. They do need to be magicians. That's why I didn't trigger. Anyway, bit of a goof on my part. What I should have added is I should have added the Black Fang or the Celestial, whichever one, it's fine, and then a Harmonizing Magician, which would let me get more materials out on field. But I just forgot, and Harmonizing Magician's not going to come up. So now here I Pendulum, and I get my materials out. So I get 3 out. I can only Pendulum 2 from my face-up extra, so I can't get all 3. And the reason I can only get 2 is because when you Pendulum from the extra, you have to do it into the extra monster zone, which is currently occupied by my Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, or to a zone that a Link monster points to. So he's pointing to 2 zones, so I can summon into these 2 zones. And then I get the one from my hand over here. This is actually fine, because Heavy Metal Foes Electromite has an effect that will let me add a card from my face-up extra to my hand, and then I'll be able to special him. Which I activate right here. Now, because this is, again, part of this misplay, because I had to destroy my Star Pendulum Graph, I'm not actually ever going to get the search off of it. Ideally, what I would have done is gotten more dorks out here through the Harmonizing Magician, and then I could pop one of them. I'm not able to pop one of my scales because a secondary effect of the Pendulum Call that I used earlier is that my scales cannot be destroyed. And Heavy Metal Foes Electromite needs to destroy in order to add the card. Then I couldn't really... I mean, in theory, I could have destroyed one of these, but I really didn't want to because I need to have enough materials out here to make the OTK happen. I'll explain that when I get to it. Now, Astrograph Sorcerer is going to get special summoned by his own effect, which is that if he is in your hand and a card is destroyed, you can special summon him. Notably, he was not in my hand when a card got destroyed. This is a weird ruling in Yu-Gi-Oh! That if a card activates in your hand, it doesn't actually have to be in your hand when the activation condition triggers. It needs to be in the hand when the effect in the hand would trigger. So I destroyed a card and added him to my hand, but because in a card game it's hidden information, and in theory my opponent doesn't know what's in my hand, they can't say, hey, that Astrograph Sorcerer wasn't in your hand when that card was destroyed, because they aren't allowed to know it's in my hand. Now, Astrograph Sorcerer is limited. He couldn't possibly have been in my hand, but those are the rules of the game, so he's allowed to come out. That's not really that relevant to this combo, but it's very funny, I think. Now Tuning Magician is going to activate. So Tuning Magician's effect is that if I have 2 Magician Pendulums in my Pendulum zone, I can special summon her from my hand or graveyard to the field, and then she gets banished when she leaves. This is really important because it's how I'm gonna get all the material I need for the combo. I wouldn't have had to do this if I hadn't misplayed earlier, but who cares? I'm gonna win anyway. Oh, and then Tuning Magician as a secondary function of the effect. I lose some life points, my opponent gains some life points. That can come up because of the FTK. I need to be able to do a very specific amount of damage. I need my opponent to not be very high on life. But it's not going to come up here. So now I summon 2 Supreme King Dragon Starving Venoms. This card you can fusion summon without polymerization. You just need the cards on field. And they need to be 2 Dark Pendulum monsters. So I had 4 Dark Pendulum monsters out. I'm going to summon 2 of these guys. What this card does is, it has a couple effects. The only one that's really relevant is that it can copy the effect of another monster on field. And the monster's effect, whose effect I'm going to copy, hasn't come out yet. But they're going to come out soon. So what this is I'm linking for Predaplant, Verte, Anaconda. That's why I needed the Tuning Magician on field, was so that I could get rid of my Electromite now that he's done his job and get out Verte Anaconda so he can do his job. What Verte Anaconda does is he can make a monster dark, which who gives a shit, and you can pay 2,000 life points, search your deck for a fusion spell, bin it, and then Verte gets the fusion effect. Or gets the effect of the fusion spell, which you then immediately use. It's very, odd, kind of, but in effect what happens is you bin a fusion card, and then you get to use that fusion card. But strictly speaking, it's a monster effect instead of a spell effect. Anyway, the card that I binned is called Instant Fusion, which lets you get out a... or you pay some life points, you get out a card, which in this case, Independent Nightingale. There's some restrictions on what you can bring out. Independent Nightingale fits within those restrictions. And what this card does is it comes out and it has an effect where you can hit your opponent for effect damage equal to the card's level times 500. There you go. You can inflict damage to your opponent equal to this card's level times 500. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that effect onto my Supreme King Dragon Starving Venoms. And my Starving Venoms are both level 8. So 8 times 5 is 40. So that's 4K, 4K, and then 500. So I'm going to do 8,500 damage once all these effects go off. And now my opponent is dead. A lot of good that Max C did them.